Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Criminally Focused. My name is Desiree, and whether you're new to my channel or you're a returning OG, thank you so much for clicking on this video. I truly appreciate your support, and I hope you'll stay a while. If you're familiar with true crime at all or you watch the news, I'm sure you heard that week 2 of the Maxwell Anderson trial was absolutely crazy. And by the end of it, we had our verdict. On Friday, June 6th, in literally less than an hour, the jury came back with a verdict of guilty on all counts. Maxwell Anderson was convicted of Sade Robinson's murder. He was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, arson, and hiding a corpse. And I'm sorry, I know this might sound stupid, but can I get a hell yeah?
Yeah! Yeah!
Hell yes.
I was so excited, along with probably all of Milwaukee and so many other people. Look, even Lamb Chop's celebrating. Whoop, whoop. But good news aside, I want to get into it. I want to talk to you about how it came about and how this verdict was reached. So let's get into week 2 and talk about the key people that testified, the evidence that they brought forth, both the prosecution and the defense's closing arguments, and then the verdict. So get comfy, grab whatever you're drinking or smoking, and let's get right into it.
New today, 33-year-old Maxwell Anderson goes from a person of interest to the man charged with the death of 19-year-old Sade Robinson. It's a gruesome case that started 10 days ago with the discovery of a human leg in Milwaukee Park.
In the interest of Maxwell Stephen Anderson.
Today by prosecutors handling the homicide of Sade Robinson. A new court document shows blood found in the suspect's home does not match with the victim.
State of Wisconsin versus Maxwell Anderson.
Started out with testimony from Pete Warbington, who is Maxwell Anderson's ex-tenant. Pete Warbington started off by testifying to being the tenant that was living in the unit below Anderson when Sade's murder happened. Pete moved in 2022 and lived there until April of 2024 when he moved out about a week after he said he was dragged out by SWAT team members, I'm assuming when they were searching Anderson's home. He wasn't testifying for too long and basically just said that Anderson was an insufferable landlord, that he was always noisy and always working on some type of little home improvement project throughout the house. And one thing that stood out to me during Pete's testimony was he said he was home the night that Sade was murdered and heard nothing. You would think that if Sade was murdered while inside Anderson's home, that would have caused some type of noise or disturbance that would have woken Pete up since he's such a light sleeper. But he didn't hear anything. Week 2 testimony also included the medical examiner, Dr. Laura Decker. According to Dr. Decker, the incisions that were made on the body parts were clean incisions, which indicated that a sharp object like a knife had been used to cut them. And although the knife or whatever weapon was used was sharp, the medical examiner also said that these wounds were very superficial and they kind of just cut through the muscle and the tissue. In order to get the bone broken, a blunt object was used or they were just snapped in half. Dr. Decker also noted something that to me ended up being crucial in this conviction of Maxwell Anderson.
I want to briefly retouch on the vital reactions. You observed no vital reactions in that leg when you examined it, correct?
That's correct.
What is a vital reaction?
You would see bleeding in the short term, and a longer term injury, you can see things like redness and swelling, scab formation.
Did that lead you to come to any conclusion on whether or not the leg was amputated from the body before or after death?
It's more likely after death.
This might have contributed to a cleaner crime scene. Dr. Decker went on to explain that once a heart stops beating and a person passes away, the heart stops pumping blood into their body. So any blood that was already in their body kind of just stays stagnant, just stays, where it was when the person died. So larger pieces of Sade's body may have bled. However, smaller pieces like the legs and the feet, those probably weren't large enough to have contributed much blood to the crime scene, meaning it would have been easier for Maxwell to clean it all up. Dr. Decker also performed a toxicology test by using muscles that were found in the leg, as well as blood from the heart that they had found in Sade's torso. In this test, they tested for over 200 substances, including alcohol. And the only thing that the results showed was that caffeine had been in Sade's system. And this makes me question the accuracy of these tests because, as we know and we could see from the video footage, Maxwell Anderson and Sade were drinking the night that she was murdered. And I guess it's not important. The only reason I wanted to know was because I cared and I wanted to see if Maxwell Anderson had drugged Sade. Okay, now let's talk about Detective Vincent Lopez, who worked for the city of Milwaukee in the homicide unit. On April 9th, Detective Lopez and his partner were looking through trash bins and recycle bins in the area of Maxwell Anderson's home. They were looking for any evidence, especially that backpack that Anderson had been seen on surveillance while he was riding the bus.
I was informed of a person of interest. I was a white male carrying a backpack based off a video. So myself and my partner at the time, Detective Thaddeus Schimmels, we were tasked with trying to locate any video in that neighborhood of 30th and Galena on April 8th and April 9th.
And not far away, I believe it was actually only 2 houses down, in one of the trash bins, Detective Lopez saw, just an article of clothing.
Just kept going through. My mind, I was just trying to hope that we found like the large backpack that I saw on video or something that just stuck out. Kept going. And I recall that day, that afternoon, we got a few houses past the defendant's address. I remember opening one of the garbage carts and seeing an article of clothing at the bottom, but it didn't hit me at that point, and I just closed it and kept searching garbage carts. My mind was that everything got picked up by the DPW, and any evidence that would have been in carts would have been lost.
And then they went to, I believe he called it a debriefing with other officers, where they talked more about the surveillance camera from the bus. And this is when he noticed that Maxwell Anderson had been wearing like a gray zip-up hoodie, which kind of made him think back to the one that he had discovered in the trash bin just a couple houses down from Maxwell Anderson's house. So Detective Lopez actually said to clear his mind and to make him feel better, on April 12th, he went back to this bin to look inside. When he did, he noticed that the hoodie was still there. So he called his partner and they took photos and collected it for evidence. And then we heard from Sharon Pelikowski, who is the forensic scientist who examined the DNA in this case. I thought her testimony was incredibly interesting. A lot of it was above my head, not gonna lie. But the pieces that I actually understood, a huge difference in the verdict in the end of this, I think. So Sharon started off her testimony by explaining what type of things can impact whether or not they're able to get a conclusive DNA result. Environmental factors play a huge role in whether or not there's enough DNA evidence to get a result. And then in Sade's case, we have factors like the fire. Fire can completely destroy DNA. Considering that Sade's car was not only set on fire by Maxwell Anderson, but then completely hosed down by the fire department, a lot of the DNA results that came were inconclusive or unable to be tested.
Were you then provided with known standards or items that you were going to try to identify known standards so that you could compare to the swab from the leg found at Warnemont Park?
Yes,
Was one of those items a toothbrush
it was.
from Sade Robinson's apartment?
Yes,
Okay. And then you also received a buccal swab standard from Sade's mother, Sheena Scarborough, correct?
yes.
Could you tell the jury regarding the toothbrush and the buccal swab standard from Sheena Scarborough, were you able to, what did you do with those items?
I swabbed the different areas of the toothbrush to get a DNA profile from it. I obtained that and then compared that to the standard from Sheena Scarborough to see if, in fact, they shared DNA at each of the locations.
What did you find?
That they did, and that the person on the toothbrush could be a biological child of Sheena Scarborough.
And when they examined Sade's car, unfortunately, The fire had done enough damage that there was barely any DNA left on it. When checking the exterior of the driver's door handle, they were able to find a single source of male DNA. However, it was too damaged to get a complete test result from it. When they tested the hoodie that had been found in the trash can, Sade's DNA was found to be on the zipper of the hoodie, as well as on the inside of the hood.
About the swabs from the zipper pull from that jacket.
That is a single source female profile that is consistent with the standard from Sade Robinson. And the probability of randomly selecting that profile from a population of unrelated people is not more frequent than 1 in 1 quadrillion.
And it's consistent with Sade.
It is.
And next we heard from officers that had been part of the group that had searched Anderson's home. And before we get into it, I just have to say that if Anderson isn't a serial killer already, he was definitely, in my opinion, heading in that direction. They found women's clothing in, I believe, a Crown Royal bag that was placed inside of Maxwell Anderson's, the ceiling rafters. They also found a woman's ID card. And I mean, come on, that is some serious serial killer behavior. Who hides random women's pieces of clothing, like their bra, in their ceiling rafters of their home? That's weird. During the search, they also grabbed several knives that ended up not having any DNA on them, but some of these knives were kind of creepy. And I know that people collect knives, and that's totally fine, but in Maxwell Anderson's case, I find it very creepy.
And then we have Detective Rachel Smith, who did amazing work. She watched hours of footage of Maxwell Anderson from the neighbor and the ring camera that they had outside of their house.
Through your employment as a detective assigned to the Homicide Division, did you assist in the investigation into the disappearance of Sade Robinson?
I did, yes.
Was one role of your investigation to look for surveillance video in the neighborhood surrounding Maxwell Anderson's home?
Yes, that was one of my assignments, yes.
What are we looking at here?
So this is, so the camera is mounted in the eastern corner, the northeastern corner of the residence, and it is pointing in a western direction. And we are, this right here is going to be the defendant's residence.
We're going to look at a lot of clips that are going to require us to look at minute details. Is that fair to say?
It is, yes.
Can you describe for the jury what we're going to be focusing on as we go through these clips and why it might be important for us to start with a daytime video?
Sure. So this is, in the nighttime video, it's raining and it's dark and there's a lot of shadows and it is from a distance, so it is difficult to see. But in this daytime video, you can see that this is the defendant's residence, and you have, which is an upper-lower duplex. The defendant occupies, we knew that the defendant occupied the upper of this residence. This is the front bay window or picture window, if you will, where we do see movement in there. And then over here to the left of the screen, which is going to be the south side of the residence, you're seeing a fenced area, and then you see this overhang here. The entry door that is the only door that leads to the defendant's unit is here. There is a second back gate there that leads to that alley.
All right, so now we're in the nighttime, so it's much harder to see. So why don't you point out for us where we want to be looking here?
It's going to be that gate area, and then this is the front window area.
And there's a window up here where I'm circling that you can't see right now because it's off.
Correct, right now.
Does that eventually turn on?
Yes, it does.
And what time are we at here?
We're at 9:23 and 29 seconds.
Playing that clip. Tell me if you see any movement.
That's where we see the motion light activate.
This light right here?
Correct. And then the gate just opened, and then you see human figures moving into the gate.
As I move this clip ahead, the gate has closed?
Yes.
Are you able to see whether those people go to the door, or can you just not see it?
You can't really see. In this clip, you're going to see that the lights come on in the upper. Right there, you see a background light come on first, and then you see the main light come on in the front window. And then you'll see a human silhouette move through that background light.
Next clip, we're picking up at basically 9:30?
Correct.
What are you seeing in the upper?
You're seeing human movement in the upper. You continue to see the movement, the silhouettes in the upper unit, in that front window.
And then we heard from Detective Joanne Downer, who worked for the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department. And I think if I had to choose, she was probably my favorite person to testify.
I'm not sure if it was her idea or the prosecutor's idea, but having her draw out the timeline with the Sharpie really helped me understand it.
So this is Mr. Anderson's residence right here. We can track her vehicle going west on Euclid, north on 43rd. Based on the records, we believe it went then down Forest Home to 35th Street. From there, they went north and presumably got on the freeway, since the next time that we see the vehicle, it's then exiting at McKinley.
Detective Donner also reviewed the surveillance footage from when Anderson got on the bus. He paid with cash and he took it out of a wallet. So when he was arrested, Detective Donner wanted to know if any wallet had been taken into custody with him. And sure enough, there was, and it was the same wallet. And next to testify was George Reinerth, who worked for the FBI on their cellular analysis team. His testimony for me was rather hard to follow, but he did have graphs that made it a lot easier. He explained that this information is actually collected to help cell phone companies optimize their network and have accurate billing. It can also be used when searching for missing people. He went on to explain that when you call someone, your phone connects to the nearest cell tower, and from there it records information like the phone number that was called, the time, and the location, like which side of the cell phone tower it connected to. And the accuracy of this data is relatively good. It's about 15 to 20 feet in like a half circle. But basically, the data that was collected, Reinhardt created a map that showed a timeline of where Anderson's phone was and where Sade's phone was that night.
Based off of looking at those records, we're able to identify what's happening during that time. So in this case, just starting with Sade's phone, the Verizon phone, it starts up in the area of the pizza shuttle at approximately 4:55 p.m., also with a Life 360 record, and has records consistent with travel down towards the area of the Twisted Fisherman, with records moving over here to the right, beginning around approximately 5:05 p.m.
Towards the end of the trial, I believe it was on the last day, Maxwell Anderson's ex-girlfriend testified. And I don't want to use her name because after her testimony, she asked the victim witness coordinator to have them remove or no longer use her name. So out of respect, we're just going to call her CW. CW said that she dated Maxwell Anderson from around December of 2022 until March of 2023. She described him as being an incredibly secretive person. He even had a secret beach that he would take her to. The beach that some of Sade's remains would later be found on. At this beach, CW and Anderson would bring books and snacks and just kind of lay out and relax. However, throughout their entire relationship, Maxwell refused to tell her the name or the location of this beach, saying that he didn't want her to take anyone else to it.
Okay, I just have one final question about the secret beach. When you would go there, were there other people around?
Not usually. I would see maybe one person walking their dog and passing by, but there weren't other people hanging out there.
Overall, they explained that Maxwell Anderson had never been physically abusive to CW. However, he had participated in some really manipulating, controlling, scary behavior. So CW ended up calling the police shortly after Anderson was arrested. She wanted to tell him that, not only was he a secretive person in everything we've already discussed, but also that he had secret departments like in his walls and in areas of his home where he would hide things.
So the final witness that we're going to talk about, at least in this video, is Detective Mason Colehap. and he worked for the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department. He was in charge of handling Maxwell Anderson's phone. And I know I keep saying it, but I definitely think this was the most damning piece of evidence that was presented to the jury. You'll have to let me know which testimony you think affected the guilty verdict the most, but Detective Colehab testified about the text messages and the photos that he found on Maxwell Anderson's phone. And overall, it was some pretty disturbing shit.
What were you looking for? What was the purpose behind going through this?
To look for any evidence pertaining to the owner of the phone, along with the anything with the disappearance of Sade.
Do you recall what date you went through that phone extraction?
I believe it was April 9th, 2024.
And her leg had been found on the 2nd, right?
I believe so, yes.
So you have multiple different programs that are used to essentially look at the contents of the phone?
Yes.
And you used 2 of them?
Correct.
What were they again?
Axiom and Celebrate.
So you already discussed that you had identified the phone number that belonged to that device, and did you learn that that was the phone number that Sade Robinson was last texting with?
That is correct.
When you went through that phone extraction, were you able to locate the text conversation between Maxwell Anderson's phone and Sade Robinson?
That is correct.
Tell us, when does the conversation start between Maxwell Anderson and Sade Robinson?
So on this first, it's a blue. I'll show, is that okay to show?
Sure.
Okay, so this is where the conversation starts. It's a blue. It was created on 3/30 of 2024 at 6:33:10 a.m. UTC. So with the conversion, it'd be approximately 1:30 in the morning.
And were you aware that they went to the Twisted Fisherman on April 1st?
Correct.
So this was just 2 days prior?
Yes.
And how does the text conversation begin?
It says the first text was to Sade, and it says Maxwell. And then the follow-up one is Sade responding to Sade.
Exchanging their names?
Exchanging their names, correct.
At 1:30 in the morning on basically a Friday into a Saturday?
That is correct.
When is the next text?
The next text is also on the 30th, March 30th. It's at 2:30 in the morning. And it says, "Hey, love, I left my comb there."
Who sent that?
That was from Sade. So Sade's in the blue, Max is in the green. A follow-up text after that one, sent a little bit after that, within 35 seconds estimate. "Can you just take it and give it back when you get a chance?"
Sade asking him for a comb that she left somewhere?
Correct.
Okay, after that?
After that, Max responded with, "Of course, I'll bring it on Sunday," and that was sent at 3:40 in the morning on March 30th.
Implicit that there was a plan to meet up on Sunday.
Objection to implicit anything.
I didn't hear you.
Objection to him implying anything. He said implicit.
I'll ask you to rephrase that question.
Does it appear from that text that there was a plan to meet on Sunday?
Objection calls for speculation.
I asked from that text alone.
Based on the way the question's crafted, I'll overrule the objection and you may answer that question.
I would say yes.
All right, guys, now let's talk about the photos that were found on Maxwell Anderson's phone. And just my opinion, but if Maxwell Anderson wasn't the most hated man in Milwaukee at the beginning of the trial, by this point, I'm sure most of Milwaukee and everyone else that was listening were ready to jump out of their seats with anger at this point.
Did you also look through the phone extraction in an attempt to find any images that might be of interest to this investigation?
I did.
I'm going to show you exhibits 288 through 293. Okay. Page through those and tell me if you know what those are.
They are photos that I found within the download of Mr. Anderson's phone.
Were they of note to you for some reason?
They were.
Why?
Because of prior knowledge of what Sade was wearing that night of the date, along with the timestamps of these photos.
Okay. So you found images that were date and time stamped. Were you able to discern the exact time those photos were taken or no?
No.
Can you explain that?
When I found these photos, we save them, and when it creates the file itself, it'll give us a date and time. And these photos I discovered were recently deleted. I shouldn't say deleted, I should say modified.
What are we looking at here?
It appears to be, I'll describe it. It's a white, very distinct sweater. I believe it's cable knit sweater is the term for it. It appears to be somebody laying on their face down on a couch or some sort of item with their breast exposed.
The next image, is it different than the previous one?
Yes, it's the same. It appears to be the same person, but with this time a hand grabbing the breast.
Did you attempt to ascertain the times in which any of those photos were taken?
I can only go off of what the program showed me, and it only said it was a modified date.
What does that mean to you?
That image was modified in some way or form.
Now, when we were talking about the modified times, all of these photos also came, the ones that were modified had this created and last access date and time, right?
Yes.
And what is the date and time denoted there?
On this, it's 1/1 of 1970 at 12 o'clock a.m.
Did you figure out what that's all about?
I don't know how, or what that actually, I don't know. I can't testify to that.
Okay.
After the prosecution presented its case, I expected the defense to at least have a couple witnesses, but that wasn't the case. As soon as it was their turn, they explained that Maxwell Anderson would not be testifying, and they rested their case. So then they both went into closing arguments, and they had 45 minutes to present their argument to the jury. The prosecutor, Ian Vance Curzan, had an incredible PowerPoint that was so well put together and detailed. I really, really think it helped to remind the jurors of things that they might have heard in week one of testimony.
Ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of this trial, I told you that I was going to ask you to do two things then. I'm asking you to do the same two things now, and to use your common sense and search for the truth. On the night of April 1st, 2024, into April 2nd, 2024, Sade Robinson was murdered. She was taken to Warnemont Park, cut into pieces, dispersed mostly into Lake Michigan, her car taken to the north side of Milwaukee, and burned behind an abandoned building at 30th and Lisbon. And the evidence in this case has shown you beyond a reasonable doubt that the individual responsible for those intentional acts is Maxwell Anderson. This is my opportunity to summarize the evidence for you, and I'm going to do it in kind of essentially the form of a timeline. And Sade Robinson, she was a 19-year-old young woman just coming into adulthood. She was anything and everything that any 19-year-old would want to be. She worked a job. She worked two jobs. She went to MATC. She was supporting herself. She had her small Lower East Side apartment, modest. And most of all, she was loved and respected by her family. She was fun, social, and clearly anybody knew her, cared about her deeply, until she came into contact with 33-year-old Maxwell Anderson. At 9 a.m., April 1st, Sade left her apartment at 1858 North Commerce Street. She is wearing the last clothes she would ever wear, that white cable knit top, the black puffy coat, the ripped jeans, and the white shoes. And she went to work at Pizza Shuttle.
And then Anthony Cotton didn't really say much.
When you go back to the jury room and you evaluate the evidence, you are required to evaluate each count separately. And what the judge told you, what Judge Crivello said when she read the instructions a little bit ago, is that your verdict for the crime charged in one count must not affect your verdict on any other count. Why is that important? It's important because this is a highly emotional case. Obviously. We all know that. We all know that it's that type of case. And we'll just call a spade a spade. I mean, we have a victim's family sitting right here. We just heard them applause when the state finished their argument. I don't criticize them at all, what they're going through. It's not at all what I'm here to do. I can't even imagine it. Can't imagine it. When I got up here in opening feels like ages ago now. It was 2 weeks ago when I stood up here and talked to all of you, and you've listened to a lot of testimony. I asked you to keep an open mind and to study the evidence closely. And I'm going to make the same request of you here today, tomorrow, when you deliberate, to study the evidence closely. You've been given a mountain of materials, and the judge has read a lot of instructions to you, and I want to talk a little bit about those instructions because as you hear Judge Crivello reading the instructions, it sort of goes on, but you're going to be given copies of those to take back with you to study closely and examine. And I ask that you look at those closely and pay careful attention to everything you heard in this case.
And from there, the jury went into the deliberations. They didn't deliberate the first night because after closing arguments and the testimony, it was just a little late. So they came back Friday morning, June 6th, and within an hour, they had a guilty verdict.
Calling State of Wisconsin versus Maxwell Anderson, case 24, CF1692, appearances.
Ian Vance Curzan and Megan Newport appear for the state along with Detective Joanne Donner.
Good morning, Anthony Cotton and Jason Finley with Max Anderson. Good morning again.
And good morning to all of you. At this point, I have received verdicts. They are in a proper legal fashion. Who is my foreperson? May I have your name and number for the record? And you did sign these 4 verdicts and date them today? I did. Thank you. I will now read them into the record. As to count 1, the verdict reads, we, the jury, find the defendant, Maxwell Anderson, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information. As to count 2, we, the jury, find the defendant, Maxwell Anderson, guilty of mutilating a corpse as charged in count 2 of the information. As to count 3, we, the jury, find the defendant, Maxwell Anderson, guilty of arson of property other than a building as charged in count 3 of the information. As to count 4, we, the jury, find the defendant, Maxwell Anderson, guilty of hiding a corpse as charged in count 4 of the information.
Jurors have spoken out since, and they explained that it was an easy decision for them and there was discussion that happened.
They were in the courtroom for nearly 2 weeks listening to mounds of evidence and testimony, many of them finally getting back to their jobs and their normal routines. But we talked to 2 jurors today who say convicting Maxwell Anderson for killing Sade Robinson was not hard.
We listened to all the evidence, things were mounting against him. But for me, what solidified it was when they finally showed the pictures off his phone. Those pictures were just cold, as I described it before, evil.
Reuben Phillips recalls a moment prosecutors showed the jury deleted pictures from Maxwell Anderson's phone. Pictures of Sade Robinson.
That was her lifeless body, and it was, that's what shook me the most. I mean, all those other pictures were horrible, but when I saw those, that was just, man, that was just something different. I mean, really, that shook me.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Maxwell Anderson, guilty.
On Friday, Phillips and 11 other members of the jury found Anderson guilty on all counts of killing and dismembering Robinson during the night of their first date. Phillips says the big question inside the deliberation room, intentional homicide versus reckless homicide.
We really didn't have much question about his guilt. It was just really the discussion of, is it possible that this could have been he just snapped all of it? But the more I looked at it, for me, the pictures, that's what made it intentional for me.
We wanted to make sure every single juror's voice was heard, that every single person's qualms were addressed.
So what sealed Anderson's fate for juror Becca Brunig?
It was just an overwhelming amount of evidence that really just pinpointed it.
Do you think if he would have taken the stand, that would have maybe changed something in your eyes, or?
No, I don't think so.
All right, guys, this has been a long one. I need to make dinner and get ready for the night. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I am incredibly grateful that there was a guilty verdict in this case. Sade's mother is such a beautiful person, and it hurts my heart to know all the pain that she's had to go through. All in all, I hope Maxwell Anderson rots in hell, and simple as that. Maxwell Anderson can go fuck right off. Alright guys, I'm out of here. Until next time, stay safe, stay focused, and go hug your family and your loved ones. Time is short. You never know. Bye.